Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Spencer. I was promised I'd go after Prince. I guess I am, except he got to go virtually. Well, maybe this is a bearer of things to come. I was here about 2 years ago, and we talked about predictions. We talked about what would happen in the future. And one of the predictions we talked about was you could talk to your phone as opposed to talk into your phone. And I'm glad to see that is beginning to happen. But let's go. So this time what I'm going to do, I'm going to rely a little bit more on history, try and take a look at what things have we talked about in the past and how perhaps what we're seeing now is just an execution of what happened in the past. But before we do that, let's talk about our topic for the day, or topic for this conference, worlds collide. What has happened in the past when worlds have collided? We've had the digital camera world collide with the SLR camera. We've had, what happened? Suddenly I think the notion of the word digital is going to go away. I mean, try telling your kids that I'd like to buy you a digital camera for Christmas. I think they would not understand what you mean. Is there any other kind? The days of those hunchback televisions or flat screen televisions, do you remember what happened in that battle? I don't know, maybe there are still some countries where you can buy the hunchback television. But I suspect if you went to buy a television, you wouldn't have to specify that you'd like to buy a flat screen television. So it's interesting as you go through this, when you're sitting in the middle of revolutions, it's very hard to see them happen. But when you play the movie 5 years forward and you come back, you realize how obvious it was that some of these things were just going to change. I think we're going to see something like that in the worlds that collide, and the two worlds we're talking about, internet and television. But let's explore the two worlds before we go ahead and watch them collide. I do believe in our lifetime, all these distinctions will vanish. And I got asked the other day, what do you think about mobile advertising versus traditional advertising? Or in this case, is traditional on the web PC advertising? Because clearly mobile is now the new thing, and what used to be called digital advertising has just become advertising. So a lot of these lines are going to blur. Let's see how these lines are going to blur in the case of the internet and television. But let's look at the internet first. Many of these conferences, we could stand here and talk about the impact the internet has had and where it stands. I don't think to this August audience we have to talk about the internet and how many people around the world are using it and what it does. It's phenomenal. You cannot imagine life without it. It's something which is now sort of our next right. We all have to have access to the internet. You get off a plane, the first thing you do is grab your BlackBerries, your smartphones, or your iPads. You want access to the internet. So it's clearly something we've all become used to, and life operates on the premise of the internet. Everything that you do is now getting transformed by the fact that you have internet connectivity. If you believe that, what's going to happen next? Where does this go? Now, before we get to where we need to go, there's a lot of different conversations and different challenges. Even the Prince talked about the fact that, oh my God, we have internet access, it has its challenges. What about privacy? What about data? It does empower a lot of people, but with empowerment, we got to make sure it doesn't cause anarchy. So there are a lot of debates, a lot of conversations are going to happen. So what I did was I went back and looked at what were people talking about. So this is some interesting advertising. Since this is a lot of you guys are from the advertising world, I thought I'd go out and pull advertising. Did you guys know that the first social network came about in 1980? The first online parties were talked about in 1983 by CompuServe. It talks about how they had a party with 9 people. They only had to wash one wine glass. Or in 1997, the first social network was called 6 Degrees. They started with 150 members. They're signing 4,000 members a day. Or you could have your own interactive personal service through Prodigy. In fact, you had Apple's from 1977. So it's interesting, if you look at this, people had the vision, and you just need the time to be right. And when the time is right, things begin to happen. So what made some of these things happen? What is the internet going to next? It took 300 million websites and 300 million domains out there before search became relevant. Because without having information, what are you going to search for? As you saw 500 million people get on the internet, suddenly we started talking about social networking becoming real, not when there was 1997, where there was 6 Degrees. So the question is, now that all these things exist, all these things are going to form the platform for the next thing that's going to happen. What is the next thing that's going to happen? No. We relied on information. We became search engine people. Now suddenly people are getting together. We're talking about social networking. Suddenly I want to be known on the internet by my real name, because it's going to be very lonely if your friends can't find you. is going to be very different if I can't get things customized or personalized to me because you don't know who I am. So what's interesting is as you see this evolution, the last set of innovation allows the next set of innovation to happen. And while you're looking at this innovation and you're thinking about, well, what does that mean? What's going to happen? You have to understand that you should be able to tell the difference between a trend and something that is here to stay. Or sometimes a trend comes early, but then it comes back and is here to stay. You guys remember the early versions of social networking. There are some other companies whose carcasses define the new future of social networking. You guys understand old search engine businesses, which then define the future search engines of the world. So it's very interesting to see what those trends are going to be. I believe we are going from the information era on the internet to the social era. Until 2003, there was 5 exabytes of information created. Now, we create 5 exabytes of information every 2 days. How are we going to make sense of all of this stuff? What's going to happen? How are we going to figure out which pieces of these information is useful, is right for us? So, in the past, all technologies have come with concerns. Do you guys know what the concern was when the printing press was invented? The concern was that people would have information overload. Maybe too much printing would happen and people would die because they would not be able to consume all that information. I wonder what they would think now. Do you guys know what the concern was when radio came about? Does anybody know? The concern was the children are going to get distracted from reading. They're going to spend too much time listening to bad content on radio, and therefore radio is an evil thing. Sounds familiar? So it's interesting. All the technologies we've talked about or seen in the past have had concerns associated with them on social behaviors, which are the same concerns you're beginning to hear as the evolution of the internet continues. So I think over time, our attitudes and our behaviors on these things are going to change, and then we're going to figure out what's going to happen. So as we go forward, as we think about the internet in the future, we've made some decisions, we made some bets at Google. Under our new leadership with Larry earlier this year, we've decided to focus the company. And the way we focus the company is, we believe certain things are bound to happen. One of the things we think which is bound to happen is we're going to live in the cloud. Now, I'm sure you can pull out a 1990 ad somewhere, this is a test, which will say we're all going to be living in a cloud. That's probably true. But I believe the conditions are right at this point in time for us to go live in the cloud. Why do I believe so? One of the fundamental conditions is the ubiquity of broadband. So pretty much anywhere in the developed world, we all believe we will have access to broadband. In fact, as consumers, all of us live our life in the cloud. My pictures are on the web, my email is on the web, my friends are on the web. There's pretty much nothing I do on my PC anymore which I want to do on my PC. And our kids don't understand the use of a personal computer. I'm sure many of you have kids. If you gave them a PC and said, you can have this, but it has no connection to the internet, what response are you likely to get? You can have this back, right? I have a 12-year-old nephew, and I went to India last week, and he said to me, can I have your old phone? I said, what are you going to do with my old phone? You don't have a SIM card, and your parents won't let you have one because you're 12. So I go, don't worry about it. We have Wi-Fi at home. I'll just use Wi-Fi to connect to it because it's much better than using the old computer I have. Right? So the notion of kids, the notion of the future age of having a device without connectivity is alien. They don't understand what the use of a PC is without connections. Right? It's just the way they don't understand what a fixed line phone is because a phone is a mobile phone. What other kind of phones are there? So it's very interesting to watch. If you think about this trend that all the generation of today is living in the cloud, I think we're all going to be moving to the cloud. Now, when that begins to happen, what happens when you start living in the cloud, right? You want to make sure your devices, you can use stuff over any device that you have in front of you. You want to make sure that all your services are stored up there in the cloud, all your content and all your data is stored up in the cloud. You want to make sure you can get to it as quickly as you can, and you want to make sure it's secure. That's not the world we live in today. There are devices which you are scared are not secure enough. Sometimes the access is slow. Sometimes your services are stored in 5 different places, and we have to remember 17 different passwords and go to 6 different services to get access to that information. So all that stuff will solve itself. It will. Well, many of you will solve it. Many people outside this room will solve it. But we are going to live in the cloud. So we've made a bet as part of the evolution of the internet that as a company, we're going to make sure we get you to your access as fast as you can, whether it's through Android, your mobile operating system, whether it's through Chrome, getting you to use it over a faster PC or a faster device, or getting you services which are in the cloud which you can use seamlessly, whether it's Google Docs, Google Apps, etc. We also understand as you go through this evolution of search, we think we're going to go from a world of information to knowledge. And the reason that's important is it was great to have 300 million websites. It was great that you could go out there and find whatever you wanted. But today, with so much information being created so rapidly, it's impossible for any of us to fathom how to use it. And my colleague Amit Singhal from Google makes a very interesting analogy. He says, if you went and did a search and you were told, how many grams of fat is there in a McDonald's quarter pounder? 42 grams. Okay, that's interesting information. Great. Now what do I do with it? If I told you it's 65% of your daily fat intake, that suddenly becomes knowledge. It makes you feel a little bad while eating that nice little quarter pounder. But the idea is you have to be able to take information and make it useful. And we believe as this happens, as there is so much information on the web, we as Google are going to try and make sure this information becomes more useful, i.e. becomes knowledge. Now it requires, for us to be able to turn information to knowledge, we're going to need some more information, as in we're going to need information about you. The other bet we believe, in addition to the cloud, in addition to information becoming knowledge, is we believe social is not about social networking. We believe social is going to form the underpinning of the web next. Now what that means is, when there's so much information, and I type in a simple query in search about a good restaurant in Monaco, I'm pretty sure there are 80 pages of results and I can get 10,000 hits. How do you and I make sense of these 10,000 hits and figure out which one of those 80 pages of 10,000 results has accurate knowledge or accurate information for me? For me to make sense of that, it'd be much more useful if I knew my 20 friends who had eaten one of those restaurants and I could just say, yeah, I trust Spencer's advice and I don't trust John's advice. But that applies to a lot more things than just restaurants, right? You need to be able to figure out how you parse information. So we believe social is going to provide the next underpinning of what happens next on the web. But that also requires that we have to understand more about you as a user, or i.e. you're going to have to provide more information about who you are and what your preferences are and what your needs are. Now clearly that is a fine line because there's a huge conversation around how much information about me is good enough that should be stored by any one company or should be out there in the web. And that's a choice we're going to have to make as users in terms of trust and convenience. I trust you to have this data about me because you're going to make it convenient for me to use the service. But I don't trust you to have this information because I don't want the convenience. But we do that today. When you take out your credit card anywhere in the world, you are making an active choice between trust and convenience. Trust that they're not going to abuse the information I just gave them. Convenience that I don't have to carry a big wad of cash as I'm traveling through most of the world. So we believe some of these things are going to happen. We believe this is where the internet is headed. So what does this have to do with television? What's going to happen? We saw the Prince talked about how the television is trying to get more social. All this stuff is happening. But before we actually talk about television, I'm sure you guys are going to explore this in the next 2 days. It wasn't quite clear to me when we talk about television, what are we actually talking about? Are we talking about the device, the screen? Are we talking about how television is distributed, i.e. broadcast or through our cable or through broadband connection? Are we talking about the software that sits on the television, whether that belongs to Comcast, that belongs to the set-top box, that belongs to the operating system of the television? Or are we talking about the content that sits on the television? Because I think with the onslaught of the internet or with the fact that a simple broadband cable is going to be stuck behind your television, I think this whole world is going to change. And we haven't even talked about advertising that funds the majority of that content or some part of that content that sits on that television. So I think there's 5 different elements of talking about television. I think all of them are going to go through a big change over the next 5 to 10 years. And 10 years from now, when you're sitting at the other end, you'll turn around and say, that was obvious. But right now, we're sitting there and saying, let's fight it. It shouldn't happen because it's going to disrupt the ecosystem and it's going to disrupt a lot of important players in this ecosystem. So let's take a look about it. Let's talk about what's going to happen next on television. The first thing, when you talk about anything, I think it's important to talk about the user. What does the user want? Now, funnily enough, the user wants control, right? In fact, look at that. You guys know what that is? It's the first remote control. It's the ad for the first remote control. It's called Flashmatic Tuning by Zenith. A flash of magic light from across the room, no wires, no cords, turns sets on, off, or changes channels. Unbelievable concept. And you remain in your easy chair. Unfortunately, bad news for the advertising industry. Right in the ad, it says you can also shut off long, annoying commercials while the picture remains on screen. We call it the mute button. Right? That was the first ad which made people jump out of their chairs, go buy a Zenith so that they could sit in their chair forever. So the first thing is the user wants control. Right? And when you want control, why do you want control? What happens today? Who controls what I watch on television? Well, actually, the guys who put the content on there control what I watch on television because you decide when I get to watch what I want to watch. That's not true for our kids. They decide when they want to watch what they want to watch. That's why we have things like YouTube, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, Apple, with lots of television shows. Actually, there's a very interesting analogy here. Consider your own behavior watching movies and your own behavior watching TV soaps. What's your behavior watching movies? There's a release date, it's out, you can watch it. Right? It's out in the theater, you can go today, you can go tomorrow, you can go next week, you can go with your 6 friends, you can take your kids, you can buy popcorn, you can go watch a television thing. If you want to watch a TV soap, you got to watch it at 9 o'clock on Friday, or it's gone. Until the gods of broadcast television decide when you can watch it again. Well, I know now with time shifting and TiVo and recording devices, it's possible to watch it even after. But it's determined for us when we can watch content. So I think if you play this movie 5 or 10 years out, it's entirely possible that the only thing that I'm going to be watching as it happens is live television, or live content, or live programming. Anything else should have a release date, should have a point where I can go watch it one way or the other, and I can get it on a different device or a different platform whenever I want it. What else? So I think we're going to have a lot more optionality in the future. And I think that's obvious to all of you guys. Not something I'm telling you which you don't know. The second thing we talk about is devices, right? We talked about whether it's a device, it's the content or not. We pulled out some more ads. Did you guys know there was something called a tummy television? In 1965, Sony came out with them. They came in different sizes depending on the size of your tummy. Seriously. The 5-inch Sony for waist sizes 38 to 46. Right there. For smaller tummies, buy the 4-inch set. If you were planning to lose weight, you could choose which one you wanted to buy. And if you got stuck with the wrong TV, you got to buy another one. Our 32 non-heating, long-living transistors plus our telescopic antenna gives you flicker-free reception, even if you jiggle when you laugh. Right? That Sony works on AC wall plug or clip-on battery pack so that your wife can sleep. We also included a personal earplug. The beauty of a TV set this small, when you've had a belly full of television, you hide it under the pillow. That's the tummy television. Remind you of how your kids use the iPad? Right? So the notion of portability, the notion of being able to consume content on your device, wherever you want to do, has been existing since 1965. It just happened to happen right now. But if you play this, what happens, right? So what's the role of a television? So we just talked about what the user wants. The user wants control. We talked about devices, right? I think we're going to see what I call the convergence of services and the divergence of devices. So a lot of people talk about convergence, right? I don't want to download music 6 different ways on 6 different times on 6 different devices and not be able to understand where I left my music. Do you? My phone has a different way of getting it. My iPad has a different way of getting it. My television might have a different way of getting it. My PC has a different way of getting it. You stream it, you download it. I don't know if I own it, I don't own it, where it sits. Sounds pretty complicated to me. Is that going to solve itself? Probably. But when that solves itself, what's going to happen? It's going to sit somewhere in the cloud. I will know that I own it. I will know that I can share it. I will know that I can share it with my family. And I should be able to use it with any device. Doesn't matter if the device happens to be a 60-inch screen in my living room, or if the device happens to be a 5-inch Sony on my tummy, or happens to be my smartphone, which I carry around when I walk around. I don't know. But we are going to start seeing convergence of services and a divergence in devices. We're not going to carry the same device for the same use all the time. So that's what's going to happen to the television set, television box, right? Or television screen. It's going to sit in our living room. It's going to be one more device on which our services work. Now, we may choose to use certain services on that device. We may choose not to use certain services on that device. It all depends on what the purpose is. You want to show somebody a picture from your Facebook post or your Google Plus post to a bunch of friends sitting at the dinner table, you may pull it up on your television. Are you going to be doing that when you're sitting by yourself? Unless you've got bad eyesight, probably not. But you are going to see a convergence of services and a divergence of devices. Well, that was the point I was supposed to make there. So that's what happens when you see your slides for the first time when you land in a new city. But anyway, so let's talk about the next thing. What's going to happen? Then we talked about community and the fact that television is becoming more social. Well, this is an ad from 1969 which says, Western Electric is crossing a telephone with a TV set. You could actually have interactivity between your telephone conversation and while you're watching TV. Unbelievable. Doesn't that sound like getting a Twitter feed or a Facebook post while you're watching web content on your PC? They were thinking about interactivity between various mediums in 1969. Western Electric. In fact, that's a picture from 1879, the oldest picture we could find from Punch's Almanac, right? That's Edison's telephonoscope. It transmits light as well as sound. Multimedia, or multiple media in 1879. So these guys are still thinking about it. This is going to happen. It just took a while to get there. So the fact that we're talking about the convergence of content and community is not a new concept. It's a very old concept, but that's going to happen. Because if you stick with the notion that there's going to be so much information, we don't know what to consume, we don't know how the future brands are going to get born, the way they're going to get born is we're going to talk about it. That's how brands are born. We have a conversation. What the medium is going to allow you is going to allow you to have a conversation while you're playing the content. So our television viewing experience is going to become more and more social. It's going to become more and more community-alike. So if you talk about all of this stuff, what's going to happen? Where do we go from here? I think where we go from here is a world where your screen becomes your screen. I'm sorry, I've gone far ahead in my slides, so I have to go back and look. But we're going to see, once again, a redefinition of the value chain of what you call television. Right? I think the world is simple. There are people who create content. There are people who consume content. They sometimes happen to be the same people. And in the middle, we have distribution systems, technology, and devices. In that middle, I don't know how things are going to sort itself, but I do believe that 5 to 10 years from now, people will still be producing content, and we will still be consuming content. How we will consume content will depend on the device we choose to consume it on. How will that service work? Hopefully, it'll work seamlessly across many of the devices we carry on us. How will we decide what we want to watch? We're going to decide what we're going to watch when we want to watch it. How will we decide when to have a conversation about it? That'll depend upon us. How do we get there from here? That part I leave to you to figure out over the next 2 days. With that, thank you very much for listening.